Hi everyone. Today's monologue comes to you from Tokyo in Japan. Um, I'm here at the United Nations University, where at the International Institute for Advanced Studies in Sustainability, talking about environmental policy. But I stepped in on a meeting talking about economic sustainability, and there was a phrase that kept being repeated about the startup environment. And it got me thinking about this strange creature we call startups, especially with reference to Kenya. I was hardly aware of startups until the COVID pandemic happened. Maybe they existed before that. But after the COVID pandemic happened, that's when I started hearing a lot about startups being startups funded by certain governments, Western governments, startups that were supposed to facilitate all sorts of things that we suddenly couldn't do because of the pandemic. Now, examples of these are those that were delivering foodstuffs to people. Some were delivering groceries. Um, others were delivering medicines, particularly, and some of them were very well funded, high flying, then suddenly folded up. And it got me thinking, a startup is certainly not an enterprise, a business enterprise my rudimentary knowledge of how business works. So there's something more about it. And I've come up with this theory. A startup is a commercial vehicle that is designed to deliver goals that are not necessarily commercial. And this is my thinking. Look, when and I'm not connecting the proliferation of startups with the advent of COVID. I don't know if there's any connection, but it happened at the same time. It coincided. If you look at the startups that were delivering groceries, because we were all too terrified to go out in the pandemic, we are told to stay home, stay safe. That stay home message, remember, was a government message. Government was the one telling us to stay home, sometimes enforced with curfews. But by the time you stayed home for 2-3 weeks or a month, getting all your groceries delivered by this startup, being paid for remotely by M-Pesa, useful as that is, you actually have a situation where commercial interests know where you live, they know the toothpaste you prefer, they know your age. These are all calculable from what you buy. They know your economic status. They have access to all your identity. They know whether you have kids or not. They know your preferences in taste, whether in foodstuffs or whether in alcohol or whether whatever. They even know whatever potential health problems you'll have if you're eating too much sugar, etc., or drinking too much alcohol or smoking too many cigarettes. They know everything about you. Then suddenly folds up, and you wonder, oh, what happened? Just folded up. But they left with gold. Imagine getting that much data on a huge population. Imagine what that does. Secondly, if you look at startups, like others that came up were those that were involved in retrenchment. As in there are startups that actually came up, and they are Western funded startups that were specializing in helping companies fire their staff that they suddenly didn't need because of COVID. And suddenly they were offering all this advice on how to dismiss staff, how to including how to outsource the service that those staff were offering. And these are destructive things, but they were well funded to do this. The same organizations even developed these wonderful co-working spaces where people could do work without having to go to any office. And that's a worrying thing. What was the intention? How come none of them were developed to help us recover from the effects of the pandemic? All of them were developed to somehow exploit the difficulties brought up by the pandemic. And of late, there's even a chain of pharmacy, a pharmacy chain in Kenya that suddenly is delivering drugs everywhere. They offer all the drug deliveries everywhere, and their branch network has expanded hugely. Now, if you think of someone who delivers drugs and healthcare products to you, and you pay by M-Pesa, very useful. You suddenly have someone who knows your age, your health problems, for women, your reproductive status. Um, they know your dietary preferences. They probably even know your monthly menstrual cycle from what you buy. And this is a huge amount of in-depth information about an individual that is close to being an infringement of human rights. But this is the startup environment, and that is the goal. That data is far more precious than anything else. And if you think about it, look at some of the startups that came up in HR. Human resources is a vital part of any corporation. This is where salaries, leave, medical cover, prevention of sexual harassment, fairness in recruitment, fairness in treatment, all the human parts of the organization. Then someone says we are offering these services someone has a startup offering these services outside the house, outsourced. So if there's a sexual harassment incident in office, it's going to be handled by someone who doesn't even know the people involved or the circumstances. How will that work? This is why even some of the problems we have with service providers, some of the app-based taxis, airlines, etc., you have a problem as a customer, and you write in, and immediately you get a response that offers rubbish. Some of the taxi hailing apps, they ask, can we give you the driver's number so that you call him and sort this out? That's stupid stuff. But it's all destructive. It destroys the fabric and the functioning of our society. Look at even with engineering firms. I don't know this for sure, but I'm sure the problems that bedevil a company, the intractable problems that bedevil a company like Boeing, are connected to startups. There was a startup that was meant to be checking on the quality control, and somehow they failed. And they followed this long chain of outsourcing, outsourced to this, outsourced to that, contracted to that no one can find who's responsible. And suddenly you have a CEO sitting in front of Congress making noises about we want to be responsible and all that. The CEO doesn't build planes, and neither does Congress. They should be taking care of the engineering and production lines. But we've got this chain of startups. You suddenly have this person in Kenya providing service, supposed to be providing service to someone who is in the United States buying a certain product. You see even our government promoting it. You buy a product in the United States, you call when you have a problem, some guy's picking it up in India. You're picking up your call in India. He doesn't even know what you're talking about. He can't help you, but he's there to provide an illusion of service. This startup culture is probably the biggest danger to the functioning of our productivity as people and the fabric that holds things together. Things are meant to be connected. You buy a product or a service, there's meant to be someone responsible for giving you that service as you have paid for, the way you're responsible for paying for it. And if there's a problem, that person is supposed to be someone who's able to solve it. Just like people working in corporations, there's a problem in the office, in the production line, whatever, there's meant to be someone there who can solve it. If it's a startup across the street or the other side of the world, he has no interest in solving it. Why should he? It doesn't affect his contract. And the guy in office doesn't care about your problem because they've contracted someone across the country, the other side of the country, to take care of it. He tells you, all we give is these numbers. You realize there's so many phone numbers these days. You're given, if you have a problem, call this. Send a direct message to this page on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever. There's all these contacts, but no response, no responsibility, and it's designed to eventually just make you give up on your complaint. It doesn't work, and it's not working because it's giving us an illusion of service where it doesn't exist, an illusion of people caring where there's no caring. And this startup environment, a lot of it is to escape responsibility, but the most worrying is the big sector of it that seems to be just interested in collecting data, information about people. How many times do we just talk about something even on a phone call and suddenly you open your social media page and it's there and you think you're crazy? So the startup sector, I think what I'll do from now on is I'll never regard startups as genuine commerce or companies or service providers. I'll always look for their real purpose. Because a startup that suddenly begins to sell you tomatoes is not about tomatoes. It's about finding out something else. Look at the startups that suddenly come up to register farmers they say they want to provide you with certain kind of seed or something like that. No, they want to know what you are producing. They want to get a handle on the food security of the country or the place wherever it is you are, so that they can exploit that in some way. So look around you. Think of the startups, because what I've heard today in this meeting, which I wasn't supposed to be in even, was pretty perturbing. What's the startup environment? How much can we invest in startups? Businesses should not be underwritten by governments if they're genuine businesses and if they want to compete. So look around you. What startups do you see? Someone who suddenly has this app that is supposed to do this, that, or the other. Apps are just information collecting things. That's all they are. When you want genuine service, try even today, call Safaricom. You won't get a human being. It can't be that Safaricom can't afford to employ a human being. It's because they don't care. And it's not just Safaricom, it's all organizations. We are tearing our own fabric apart as people and as societies in search of profit. And it comes to the idiocy I was talking about, this madness in search of automation of everything. Once you automate everything, who are you going to sell the product or service to once you've disempowered the same society that's meant to buy it? It's the cannibalism and the foolishness of capitalism. So be careful about startups. They are often just commercial vehicles towards another destination, and one that is not necessarily concerned with our welfare.